Good evening. So let's start by recapping briefly. So we went through last time, of 2 times ago, we went through the Alter Rebbe, went through the Rebbe's letters. Then on our last year, we went through the Gemara, starting with the Gemara in Pesachim that talks about Zugais, peers, and the Gemara in Shabbos, Kuf Chavtes Amud Beis. We went through where Shmuel talks about the days when you're not supposed to wet blood, and Rashi explained because on those days the mazel of Mars is on even hours, rules at even hours. So those days are bad days for bloodletting, and we went through Rambam Shitta, but we won't recap that because it's not relevant to the Hamshich. Here we had the chart of the various mazolas and their hours. And then we got to the various sources for this minhag and how we interpret it. So we started off, I feel like I didn't give it enough historical background last time. So we started off with the Sefer Hibber from Rabbi Avraham Bar Chia Anasi. Rabbi Avraham Bar Chia is relatively unknown today, but he's actually quite an important figure historically. He was the great-grandson of Rav Chizkiah Gaon, the last Gaon of Pumbedisa, who briefly succeeded Rav Hai Gaon. He was either second great or third great-grandson of Rav David ben Zakkai, the Reish Galusa in the times of Rav Sadia Gaon. Besides for being a tremendous Talmid Chacham, he was also a very well-known mathematician. He's actually known in the secular world as well as for his contribution to mathematics. He was actually the first to record the solution to the quadratic equation. He actually the first in the West to mention the quadratic equation altogether, the first recorded solution. He also translated al-Batani's astronomical writings. Al-Batani was, of course, the great Islamic Arabic astronomer, whom after all the great medieval Jewish astronomers based their work on. And he came to the West and generally and specifically to into the Torah world through the translations of Rabbi Avraham Bar Chia Anasi into Lashon Kiddush. He also translated things into Latin. And he was the teacher of, he was a student of Rav Moshe Darshan, whom Rashi quotes all the time, and he's the teacher of Ibn Ezra. So he made quite a contribution, and although we don't study his works that much directly, but his influence is certainly very much felt in all the writings of the Rishonim. The Ibn Ezra Sefer Hibber is based on his Sefer Hibber. The Rambam's Kiddush Achedesh is based on his work. So that's why we're going to be drawing on him extensively for the perspective, how the mazalas were understood. So he lays out what a day is, how a day could be counted, either from the top of the night, the beginning of the night, or from the beginning of the day, or from midday or midnight. Those are the four corners, so to speak, of the 24-hour cycle, and we can start counting hours from any of them. Generally, he says that it's preferable to count days rather than hours, but days from either nighttime or day, because those are easily recognizable to the masses. And of course, the Goyim count from the day, and we count from the night for most things, for the calendar and virtually everything else in halacha. And he also talks about how when we talk about the mazalos, we saw that he talks about Shosh Shabbos, that the day is divided into 24 equal hours. So that's the groundwork. Then we went on to the Gemara in Eruvin, specifically Tosfos there, who seems to suggest that it is Shosh Manius, or assume that it is Shosh Manius. And he asks questions based on that. He does offer the suggestion that perhaps it could be Shosh Shabbos, but he rejects it. But then we saw how Rabbi Yaakov Emden resolved those questions and answers and concludes that in fact it is talking about Shosh Shabbos. We saw also Ibn Ezra and Rambam also talk about Shosh Shabbos equal hours, not Shosh Manius. Then we went to last time we got to the Tikkun Shabbos. That's another thing I think maybe we didn't spend enough time just giving a little background. I got some comments on that as well on the YouTube channel as well as on by WhatsApp. So Tikkun Shabbos, there are actually two Sfarim that were published approximately 20 something, 23 years apart, something like that, that have the same name, and they're often confused. The first Tikkun Shabbos is from a Talmud of the Ramak. It was published in Venice, and it was actually published as an addition to the Reishis Chachma together with the Shari Tshuva, or I'm sorry, Tikkun Tshuva from the Arizal. But that was from a Talmud of the Ramak. The later Tikkun Shabbos that was published in Krakow was from it's a sort of mysterious because it's from a pretty unknown someone with the name of Yehuda Kain, and it's not very well known. He wasn't himself a Talmud of the Arizal, but he quotes from great Chachamim and sages that he received from, and Rabbi Yosef Ibi in his magisterial 3-work volumes on the Kabbalah Dari demonstrates that his sources are the Chachmei, the Chacham of Saloniki, and specifically it was a specific Chacham there by the name of Rabbi Yosef Sasson, who, although not himself a Talmud of the Arizal, he spent time in Egypt, and then afterwards in Saloniki. Also in Egypt, it was the Kabbalah Dari was already well known even in his own lifetime. There was a lot of communication between Eretz Yisrael and Egypt, and of course the Arizal himself was from Egypt. And then when he was in Saloniki as well, he constantly he gathered things that he heard from Talmidim of the Arizal. He records. We don't have anything published from him, but there's a manuscript in the Oxford Library, about a 30-40 page manuscript of his ledger, of his notes, where he records many teachings of the Arizal from various Talmidim of the Ari that either he heard indirectly or even directly, and he seems to be the primary source of the Tikkun Shabbos. Interestingly, I actually, while I was just refreshing myself as far as the history of the Tikkun Shabbos, I came across an excerpt of this ledger that actually hints at this minhag. It doesn't say anything about Kiddush, but it says about taking in Shabbos an hour early. Not an hour. I'm sorry, taking in Shabbos still before nightfall, which seems to also hint at this minhag of Dafka taking in Shabbos in the mazel of Tzedek, of Jupiter, not in the mazel of Maidim, which is the first hour of the night. So then we get to the Tikkun Shabbos, but yeah, nevertheless, some are skeptical that everything here is necessarily from the Ari. There could be other minhagim mixed in, other influences, and we see this minhag first arose in the context of Chasidei Ashkenaz. We saw the earliest sources were the Rekeach and then the Maram Rottenberg. The Rekeach quoted in the Avudraham, and the Maram I'm sorry, the Rekeach was quoted in the Maril and the Maram Rottenberg in the Avudraham. So it is possible that that's the source of this minhag. Someone commented on the YouTube that there's no mention of Masalis in the Kabbalah Dari. That is correct. So yeah, I guess we don't know, but Tikkun Shabbos is a very influential sefer. It was published many times over. After the first few publishings, it was actually turned into something like a machzer or siddur for Shabbos. It's the first source of Shalom Aleichem in the form that we have it, more or less. Although there is mention of a minhag of saying Shalom Aleichem to the Malachim previously, but the actual Piyut Shalom Aleichem is first recorded in Tikkun Shabbos, and many other minhagim that are throughout Klal Yisrael, accepted throughout Klal Yisrael, come from the Tikkun Shabbos. So it was very influential. It was published as a siddur, included Shir Hashirim, which is also that's from the first Tikkun Shabbos, from the Talmud Ramak. But nevertheless, it included a lot of the Zmiris, Azam B'Shvachin, Asadu Sudasa, B'nai Chala, they all come from the Tikkunei Shabbos. So it was a very influential work, and under its influence, that's where this minhag starts to spread. So again, just to recap, Tikkunei Shabbos said that as soon as Shabbos comes in, you should take in Shabbos early, and you shouldn't waste time in shul. You should go straight home, because the first hour of the night is the hour of the mazel maidim, and you want to make Kiddush before that, at the time of the mazel of tzedek, because the two malachim who the Gemara, so we saw the Gemara earlier, that the two malachim accompany everyone home from Shul on Shabbos night. Then he identifies those malachim as the malachim of Jupiter and Mars. Tzadkiel is the malach of Jupiter, Tzedek, and the Samach Mem is the malach in charge of Mars. We saw earlier, we also spoke about the discrepancies in the Sefer Zion malach, the other malachim mentioned, but that's not relevant at the moment. So that's where this minhag, that's I guess the source that's most often cited for this minhag, and so the Tikkunei Shabbos says that if the malachim find the shulchan, the mita, the ner all laid out, then the good malach benches the person, and the bad malach has to say amen, and vice versa. If everything is not ready, the bad malach does the opposite of bench the person, etc. So that's from the Tikkunei Shabbos. We saw the Maharsha, who talks about, doesn't talk about Kiddush specifically, but he talks about taking in Shabbos, dafka in the time of the mazel of Jupiter, Tzedek, not in the time of Maidim, which is the first hour of Shabbos, and also Shabbos day to take in Shabbos not in the first hour, Shabbos, meaning to start your day, Shabbos day, a little later. So you're starting in the time of the mazel of Tzedek again, rather than the mazel of Shabsai, which is the mazel before Tzedek, which is also has negative associations. Next source we saw was the Karban Shabbos. Karban Shabbos is not a very well-known sefer at all. However, this Karban Shabbos is repeated word for word in a very, very famous and influential sefer called Chemdas Yamim. We discussed it briefly last time. We can elaborate on that a little bit more. Chemdas Yamim is, of course, a very controversial sefer. It was the first popular, so to say, Kabbalah sefer. It recorded lots of Kabbalistic minhagim, and gathered. It was gathered from many different sources. It was many years. It was a mystery who wrote it. It has a lot of Sabbatean, not a lot, but there's several Sabbatean passages in Chemdas Yamim. So many forbade using the sefer due to that, but nevertheless, it proved quite popular because there was a great thirst for Kabbalah, and especially in Europe, where Kabbalah was not as known. And this was a work that anyone can read. It wasn't, very complex like some of the deeper Kabbalistic Sfarim, and it proved quite popular. Recently, Michael Goldhaber pretty conclusively demonstrated that the printer, Yaakov Al-Khazi, who is the one who brought it to print, there was actually quite a bit of controversy about that. If he was the one who put in, there were different theories how the Sabbatean portions got in. There were actually some that Yaakov Emden famously attributed the sefer to the Sabbatean prophet, so to speak, Nasan Avaza. But Michael Goldhaber, he did a pretty conclusive proofs. He found that actually the printer, well, not the printer, the one who brought it to print, Yaakov Al-Ghazi, known as Mari Al-Ghazi, he actually was the compiler, as you call author, but it's not really author because it's really just cut and paste from other Sfarim. So he was the one who compiled this sefer. So this particular portion was taken from the sefer Karban Shabbos. And again, he talks about the Malachim, Maidim and Shapsai, and he says, again, he doesn't emphasize so much not making Kiddush in the time of Maidim as much as Dafka making Kiddush in the time of Tzedek, the time of Jupiter, just like the Maharsha. So again, we see the influence of the Marsha and the earlier sources, Dafka to make Kiddush earlier. Not we don't see the minhag yet as not making Kiddush between 6 and 7 as much as making Kiddush before 6. We went through the Ziyah. We'll skip that. That's not really relevant now. And then we went to the Maril. So just to recap, there's something else that's another topic that I got a lot of questions on. So the Maril and the Levush, and the Tesis Yomtiv, and Tzemach Tzedek, they're basically saying all the same thing. They're talking about the cheshbon of the Tkufa. So we know that there's 4 Tkufas in the year, and there are certain you can't drink water at the time of the Tkufa. It's a time of danger. So the question is, how do you cheshbon out the Tkufa? So the Gemara gives, there's 2 types of cheshbonos. We have the cheshbon according to the Tkufa Shmuel, according to the Tkufa of Rav Ada. So although our calendar goes according to the Tkufa Rav Ada, the Tkufas are worked out according to the Tkufa Shmuel because it's just easier that way. The year is divided in 4, and the solar year is counted as 365 and a quarter days. So the question becomes, let's say the Tkufa is 9 o'clock or 3 o'clock. Do you count from the 3rd hour of the night? Do you count from Shkia, 3 hours? Going back to like we saw in the Sefer Ibra, right? That there are different ways to count the day. You can count from Shkia, you can count from Chatzais. There are different ways to count. So the common practice already in the times of the Maril was to count from the night. People would count, let's say it was the 3rd hour of the night was the Tkufas. They would count for 3.5 hours into the night. So let's say Shkia was 6 o'clock. So 9 o'clock, they considered it the Tkufa. Or if Shkia was 9 o'clock, then 12 o'clock, they would consider it the Tkufa. And all these sources, starting from the Maril, and then we have the Tesis Yomtiv, the Levush, they all talk about how really this is not correct. Really, the Tkufa is based on, it's not based on Shois Manias, it's based on Shois Shabbos. And although the common practice was also counting Shois Shabbos, but they were counting from Shkia, and Shois Shabbos really don't have anything to do with Shkia. Shois Shabbos are fixed. So the correct way to count would be from Chatzos, or I mean, you can count, it doesn't really matter how you count, but the point is it's fixed hours. So you would count 12 hours a day, 12 hours a night. So it doesn't matter when Shkia is, night would start at 6 o'clock, 6 hours after Chatzos. So if we spoke of, let's say the Tkufa was 3 hours into the night, it would be 9 o'clock. If Shkia was 9 o'clock, was the Tkufas Tammuz, and Shkia is 9 o'clock. So although common practice was to make to observe the not to drink water and other things of the Tkufa at night at midnight, 3 hours into the night, the correct time should have been at 9 o'clock, 3 hours after 6 o'clock. Nevertheless, all these sources defer to the minhag, and they all write that even though the correct time to do it is 3 hours after 6 o'clock, night always starts at 6 o'clock, 6 hours after Chatzos. Daytime always starts 6 hours after midnight for these purposes, calendar, day and night. But since the common practice was to count from the night, so they did not want to disturb the common minhag. And the Maril actually writes, and this will actually be interesting as we see how this minhag that we're discussing is applied, that even though he followed the common minhag, he himself, he didn't tell others to do this, but he himself was careful. The 2 Sveikas, he says that from 2 Sveikas, he was careful 3 hours. So the Tzemach Tzedek, this is of course Tzemach Tzedek Akadmain, he explains that what that means is that the Maril, in depending which way the mistake was, meaning it was the Kufas Tammuz and the common practice was to observe it. It was 3 o'clock, let's say 3 hours into the night. So the common practice was to observe it at midnight. So he would do 3 hours before, which was the real time it was supposed to be, was 9 o'clock. If it was the other way around, if it was Tkufas Tevis and Shkia was instead of 6 o'clock, it was 3 o'clock Shkia. So instead of observing it, and it was 3 hours into the night, so the common practice was to observe it at 6 o'clock. So then he would also observe 3 hours later at 9 o'clock. So he was machmer to observe both the correct way and the way it was commonly observed. But that's what he did for himself. Nevertheless, for what he directed others to do was to follow the common custom. We also saw that the Baril mentioned this minhag of taking in Shabbos in the time of Tzedek, before the time of Maidim, and he no, I'm sorry, no, not to take it, but he mentions the two malachim that are associated with the two mazalas. Although he doesn't, he refers to the minhag, but he doesn't get into the details, and he mentions that it's in the Rekeach, even though we don't have it in the Rekeach today that we have, but that's the source we have that this minhag originally is mentioned in the Rekeach. And of course, as we said, the Rekeach is the author of Rizil Amalach, who discusses all these mazalas, so it kind of fits together. Where were we? I think that's basically where we left off last time. Yeah, so now we get to the question, do we do it an hour before, or meaning is the minhag, is the zahirus to dafka do it before the Mazal Maidim in the time of Tzedek, or is the zahirus not to do it in the Mazal Maidim? That's the question we're going to address now. So we start with the Gemara and Brachas Chavzayin Amud Beis. Amar Rav Chia bar Abin. Rav tzolish al Shabbos be'erev Shabbos. Rav would daven ma'ariv of Shabbos on erev Shabbos. So of course we know that the first Mishnah in Perek Daled the Brachas, Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim argue what time is this? Does the time of Mincha end and the time of ma'ariv begin? So Rabbi Yehuda holds that you could daven Mincha till Paga Mincha, and from then on you could daven ma'ariv. And Chachamim hold that you could daven Mincha till nighttime, and from nighttime you could daven ma'ariv. And of course, the Gemara says, the Ovid K'mar Ovid, you can do either way you want, as long as you don't contradict yourself by davening Mincha and Ma'ariv in that disputed time period. You can't daven Mincha after Paga Mincha and also daven Ma'ariv before night. So the question is, does that also apply to Shabbos? So the Gemara in Brachas there says, Rabbi Chia bar Abin says that Rab will daven Ma'ariv of Erev Shabbos on Ma'ariv of Shabbos on Erev Shabbos before Shabbos started. Rabbi Yeshua Matzah shel Mitzvah Shabbos b'Shabbos. Rabbi Yeshua would daven the Ma'ariv of Mitzvah Shabbos on Shabbos. Rav tzoli shel Shabbos b'Erev Shabbos. So the Gemara says, so we know that Rav daven Ma'ariv of Shabbos on Erev Shabbos. Eimer Kiddush al Hakes, or Eimer Kiddush al Hakes. Did he make Kiddush on wine also Erev Shabbos, or did he not make Kiddush on wine on Erev? Meaning, did he wait till nighttime to make Kiddush or not? Tashema, the Amar of נחum, Amar Shmuel. נחum said in the name of Shmuel that you could make, not only can you daven Ma'ariv of Shabbos on Erev Shabbos, but you can also make Kiddush on Erev Shabbos. And the Gemara that we have, in the Girsa we have is V'ilchas HaKavasei. The halacha is like Rav Nachman, Amar Shmuel, and like Rav, that you can make Kiddush before nightfall. However, as you see in the Sourcebook here, on the side, it's mitzayin that in the girsa of the Rif and the Rosh, the words Hilchos HaKavasei are omitted. So it's not entirely clear whether, in fact, the halacha is like this Gemara or not. The other source is from the Yerushalmi. So we have the Yerushalmi is talking about the first Mishnah in Brachas, Meim Sakein Shema Ba'arvin, Ba'arvis, Arvin, to be precise. When does the time of Kriya Shema of nighttime begin? Anan Taninon Mishash Aken Nechnasin Lecho B'Trumasa. So the Gemara says, the Yerushalmi says, we learned, our Mishnah says, from the time of that the Kehanim go in to eat their Truma. That's the Mishnah that we have. Tani Reb Chia. However, Reb Chia learned Mishash Adarech Bnei Adam Nechnasin Lecho Piton B'Leil Shabbos. From the time that people went in to eat their bread on Shabbos night, at the time when people would sit down for their Friday night meal. And we were taught, I was taught that on this, that their words are pretty close together. It's not a big difference between the two of them. So we'll see the Pnei Moshe, Anan Karinan, the Masnisin, Mishosh Aker, Chu, Stam, Puekatan, and Masnisin, the Polagava, Betchil Azmana. That's the Stam Mishnah, nobody argues. Tanya the Bechia, but they sefta, Ish Mechilta, in the beginning of the Sefta, the Puigi, Bad the Garsina Sham, Memes Aker, Sham Barbis, Mishosh Penel, Mchas Lecho, Pitam Babish Abbas, Stevie the Bear, the Chacham, Mishosh Aker, Zakain Lecho, Betrumasa. Similar to David. So in the Tesefta, it's presented as an argument that Chachamim hold that from the time that the Kohanim go in to eat their truma, which is Seisek Chachamim. However, Remeir argues and says that it's from the time that people go to eat their Shabbos meal Friday night. Even though it's not exactly the same shear, nevertheless they're pretty close together. It's not that far apart from the time that the Kohanim would eat their truma, meaning Tesek Chavim. The time that that people would start their Suda was pretty close to that. So now we get to the halacha. So we start with the tour. When you come home, you should hurry up to eat immediately. The Tanya, as we learned in the Braisa, so we were in the midst of Zachas by making Kiddush on wine as soon as Shabbos comes in. So therefore, you should make Kiddush as soon as Shabbos starts. Then we go to the Shulchan Aruch. So again, Shulchan Aruch says that as soon as you get home, you should immediately hurry up and eat immediately. But it doesn't say a time. So the next source we have, which is going to be relevant here, is the Rama Mipana. So if you weren't just a Torah in Shulchan Aruch, you think it's an obligation. The second Shabbos starts, you daven, and the second you finish davening, you got to run home and immediately make Kiddush and immediately eat. But the Rama Mipana disagrees, or I don't know if he disagrees, but he qualifies. He qualifies this obligation. So we're going to skip to the highlighted part. The minhag of most Yidden from way back when was not to rush home to eat the Suda Shabbos night. Take a immediately after davening Ma'ariv. Each one according to his pleasure. And even though they're not rushing and they take their time, they're still Makayim, the mitzvah of Zachrei al Yayin, when making Kiddush on wine at the entrance of Shabbos, as long as they don't start their Suda without making Kiddush. And especially so since the din of making Kiddush dafka on wine is midrabanan, and the mitzvah of Zachreu B'Knisasei, which is Zachas Yom Shabbos al-Kadshe, we already fulfilled that mitzvah mid'eraisa by davening Ma'ariv. And since we daven Ma'ariv, as soon as Shabbos comes in, we already fulfilled the mitzvah mid'eraisa, and we fulfilled it at the entrance of Shabbos, Zachreu B'Knisasei. So therefore, there's no rush to rush home and make Kiddush on wine, since we already fulfilled the mitzvah mid'eraisa. And as long as you make Kiddush before you eat the Suda, you're fine. And now we're going to talk about when the minhag actually changed. So if you look at the Rishonim, generally, in terms of davening Ma'ariv, not just on Shabbos, even during the week, they always daven Ma'ariv during the day. Certainly in Ashkenaz, the minhag was to daven Ma'ariv when it was still bright outside. It was quite dangerous to walk around that night in medieval Europe, and all the minyanim for Ma'ariv were before Shkia. In fact, I think the Pnei Shua writes that in his city, the minhag, by the time they finished davening, I guess in the summer probably, but they would daven Ma'ariv, they would go home, eat their Suda, and then they would go spatzir, take a nice walk on the boulevard, and it was still bright and sunny. It was still, the sun was still out. So they started Shabbos still early in the day. I mean, relatively, I guess, in the summer when the day was very long there. But you can't start Shabbos before Paga Mincha, but it was still long before Shkia. So when did this minhag start to change? When did people start davening Ma'ariv at night, and specifically on Shabbos? When did people start taking in Shabbos at nighttime? So we start with the Divrei Chamudis, which is from the Baal Tesis Yom Tiv. Mekarev Nischadish Peikal Kadosh Prague, Mekal Kadosh Kil Kadesh Vina, Shirabim Misasim Arbis was followed B'tzibur Bizmana. Recently, it was Nischadish. It became a new minhag here in the community of Prague and the community of Vienna to Vienna that many get together to speak to daven Ma'ariv with a minyan at its time, meaning at night. So this is the first source I'm aware of for that the minhag began to change. I guess it became safer. This is already in the mid 17th century. It already became safe to get together at night and daven Ma'ariv at night. Then the next source, you have the Maram Shif, who's roughly contemporaneous with the Tesis Yom Tiv. He's writing at about the same time. The Kanra you see, and here I saw, it's in the Drashos to Veschanan, it's printed in the back of his Kiddush Halachos. She'ein makpid na ois ratzin v'shas tefillah tefillas arvis mispalin kol yemei hakayit shveiv zmanim gimel shai shveiv kedem halayla. That in the summer people don't pay attention to the eis ratzin. That's a special time to daven Ma'ariv by night, and instead they daven 3 hours, 3 entire hours before the night. The whole main takana of Ma'ariv was connected the Ivarim of the Talmud Shabbat Harbayim, the whims of the Talmud of the last carbon, and they didn't have time to completely be burned during the day, so they were burnt the entire night. So since they were burnt at night, so for that the Chacham were Masakin Tfilas Ma'ariv. So its main time is by night. Rak mipnei shas adchak sheyefshel l'chaven libei. Can't really see here. So he says only they were only matir davening early from a shas adchak because it was difficult. They couldn't get a minyan together twice, sai for mincha, sai for ma'ariv, and it wasn't possible to make each one in its time. There wasn't enough time. It wasn't possible to keep people together for a minyan for that long. But if that's only after Paga Mincha. But the daven before Paga Mincha, according to everybody, you're not Yetzer. And even if you count the Shaizmanias, meaning you see that it wasn't so pashut in his time to count Shaizmanias, some counted Shaiz Shabbos. But even if you're going to count Shaizmanias, and in the summer Shaizmanias is much longer than an hour. Even if we say it's going to be 2 hours, so even 2.5 hours. Paga Mincha is an hour and a quarter before Shkia. So let's say it's 2.5 hours. Nevertheless, here people are davening even earlier. They're davening 3 hours before night. And for sure they're not Yetzer Kriyas Shema. So and that they're the ikr that people are saying on Krishma Amita, they're also saying it before it's Esekacham, which is its ikr zman. So people also not being Yetzer Kriyas. He goes on at length. Let's skip over a little bit here. So then he comes to Shabbos. Especially on Erev Shabbos, Avera Geras Avera, Ein Mekayim they came Gimel Sudas b'Shabbos. Through this, they're also not Mekayim the mitzvah of 3 Sudas on Shabbos. So Machlekes actually, the Alter Rebbe brings both days. It says better to be Yetzer for both days, to try to eat at least the Kazayas after this man. But that's all separate Machlekes. We're not going to get into that right now. But the Maram Shef is assuming that you have to have all 3 Sudas in the actual Shabbos, not in Tosefes Shabbos, but rather in Shabbos itself after this man. So they're also not being Mekayim the mitzvah of Shabbos. So he decries this custom of taking in Shabbos early, eating the Suda early, and he goes on at length over here. And he goes on nearly Mikar Rai the Lav Shapri Domi. He brings a Rai from the Gemara. We're not going to get into that from Psachim. Anyway, the bottom line is he's saying the Lav Shapri Domi nearly Mikar Rai the Lav Shapri Domi Kaddish Beid Yom, that it's not good to make Kiddush when it's still day b'Shabbos. Ad Tzesek Chacham. You have to wait till after Tzesek Chacham So basically, he's decrying the minhag of making Kiddush early, taking in Shabbos early. He says you have to wait for Kiddush till Tzeisak Recham. And we see already in the time the Alter Rebbe writes in his Chuvas and seventh Chuvah in the Shut. He goes on. It's about a whole different subject, but at the end there's a line here that's relevant to us that he talks about the how even after the minhag changes, you can't be makbid on those. The Chuvah there is about the Sakinim Ulutashim, without Rebbe's famous Takana. But he says that the Chiyai Gavna Matzinu Kama Avach Shrechu Man Apeskim Shena Me'achrenim U'Vederes Shulfanenu Da'ogu Aves Avisenu Kedas HaMakilin. Somebody please mute yourself. Whoever's thank you. That before us, that our forefathers follow the custom of those that are Meiko. But there's and our generation, many are made to be Machmer. Please do not unmute yourself unless you have something to say. Thank you. Kamei Chadash, for instance, Chadash. The time the Alter Rebbe somewhere machmer. Tfilas arbis bismana. And this is what's relevant to us, that some started being machmer to daven ma'ariv only in its time after Tzeisak Recham. Okay, gavna tuva. So we see already in the time even before the Alter Rebbe, but in the place of the Alter Rebbe in Russia, or White Russia, we see that they already started being a sedulous to daven ma'ariv dafka in its time. We also have Tzemach Tzedek writes in Chidushim on Brachas, right at the beginning there, he writes about whether someone who's machmer to only daven ma'ariv after this man happens to be in a place where there's no minyan by night after Tzeisak Recham, he should daven with the earlier minyan or not. Tzemach Tzedek says he doesn't have to. So we see already by the time of Tzemach Tzedek, it already became an established minhag that we're machmer, and of course, even though there's no written source for it, but we know Kabbalah, the Hasidim were always very, very makbid not to daven ma'ariv early, and not to take in Shabbos early, and to dafka daven ma'ariv in its time. So now we'll see how this applies to the minhag that we're discussing here. So the first source in halacha and the poskim for the minhag of Kiddush specifically, not to make Kiddush between 6 and 7, is the Eila Shabbos. Is very influential pasuk on Hilchos Shabbos. He lived about the same time as the Magen Avraham, mid to late 17th century, and the Magen Avraham often argues on him. He's Bar Plukta in Hilchos Shabbos. So we'll see how the Eila Shabbos brings down this halacha and how the Magen Avraham brings it down. So let's start with the Eila Shabbos. That the Shulchan Aruch says that he should rush to eat immediately. The Achrenim write, and someone put in here to see the Sefer Tikunei Shabbos, the Kaddish Kiddush Shenichlas Mazel Maidim, that one should make Kiddush before comes in the Mazel of Mars. The Tchilas of Shabbos B'Shamash Mazel Maidim, because the beginning of Shabbos night is the time of the rule of the Mazel of Maidim, and the Samach Mem Meishel Olav, and the Samach Mem is the angel who rules over Mars. And the first hour of Shabbos, and the last hour of Erev Shabbos is the time of the Mazel of Jupiter, and his Malach is Tzadkiel. And those are the two Malachim that Chazal tell us, that one is good and one is bad. And this is where the minhag comes from. It's good not to be Makabel Shabbos with Kiddush in the time of the dominion of the bad angel. Only in the time of the dominion of the good angel. And the bad angel will, despite his will, he'll be forced to say Amen. If he didn't make Kiddush by day, he should wait until the time of the dominion of Mars should pass, and then he should make Kiddush. So here we have, for the first time, we see the minhag in its present form, that First, he says that it's better to make Kiddush during the time of the Shalva of the Mazel of Tzedek, which we saw in all the previous sources. But he says that if you could not make Kiddush at that time, at least you should make Kiddush at the time. You should not make Kiddush at the time of Mars, because you would think, I mean, if you're looking just at the previous sources, it would be very reasonable to conclude that you have to hurry as much as you can, so you get the bracha in the time of the Mazel of Tzedek. But if you're late, well, you're going to sit around and be even more late. So just make Kiddush, whatever it is. But no, the Eila Shabbos says no. If you miss the time for Tzedek, you don't say, oh, I missed the boat, just make Kiddush now. No, you have to wait till the time of the Mazel of Maidim passes. So here we see the minhag, and it's the way we observe it today, not to make Kiddush between 6 and 7. Now we see the Magen Avraham. Meaning to make Kiddush. In order for him to do the mitzvah of Zchiras Shabbos, remembering Shabbos at its onset. And he writes in Tikunei Shabbos that he should make Kiddush before night. Because in the beginning of Shabbos night is the Mazel of Mars. And the end of Friday is the Mazel of Jupiter. Therefore, you should make Kiddush in the time of the Mazel of Tzedek. And that's what we saw in the Tshuva of the Maril before. And so that's one thing. Now he's going to say something else. Now remember, he's going to quote the Tshuva we saw from the Rama Mifano. Mנחem Azariah b'Tshuva Kasav, and Mנחem Azariah Fano, the Rama Fano writes in the Tshuva, if he doesn't have an appetite to eat, he can wait. Because he already was mekayim the mitzvah zacher b'knisasei b'beis hakneses and shul ayin sham, meaning that when he davened, he already was mekayim the mitzvah b'deraisa. So even though he has a mitzvah b'drabanan of making kiddush, as long as he makes kiddush before the suda, he's still mekayim zacher b'knisasei b'drabanan, and b'deraisa he was certainly mekayim zacher b'knisasei when he davened. We Yerushalmi reish brachas, and in the Yerushalmi that we just learned before in the beginning of brachas, Issa shederech lechu shah echos that the derech to eat the Suda of Shabbos night an hour or two into the night. That's how Rashi explains it. So we see that the Magen Avraham brings down the Magen Avraham can actually be read different ways. I've seen some read the Magen Avraham where the tshuva of the Menachem Azariah tshuva is a hamshich to before. It's a continuation that he's qualifying what he said earlier. That first he brings from the Tikunei Shabbos that you should make Kiddush before the Mazel of Maidim. Nevertheless, Menachem Azariah says that if you didn't have an appetite, or for whatever reason you didn't, you can wait. So the implication being that if you didn't make Kiddush in the time of Tzedek, at least wait till after Maidim. But it seems to me it's a pretty stretched reading. The way I read it, it seems to me much more reasonable to read it as a completely separate din, that he just Magen Avraham often does that, to go from one din to another. So it seems to me that first he brings down the Tikunei Shabbos to make Kiddush before 6 o'clock, and then he also brings down separately the heter of the Rama Mifano that he can make Kiddush, that if he's not hungry he doesn't have to rush, and brings a source for it from the Yerushalmi. But it seems there's no hachich from the Magen Avraham that it's dafka not making Kiddush by Maidim. Again, it seems going back, the Magen Avraham seems to be saying the same thing as the previous sources. That the thing is, the whole point is to make Kiddush dafka by Tzedek. So it seems that the Magen Avraham and Eila Shabbos are disagreeing. So we have the Eila Shabbos saying dafka not to make Kiddush on Maidim. So if you miss Tzedek, you have to wait till after Maidim. But the Magen Avraham doesn't say that. Now the next source we have is the Machzis HaShekel, who lived around the time of the Alter Rebbe. And he gets into the whole technicalities of the hours, how we count the hours. This is where things get interesting and technical. This is where we've been heading this entire time. So let's see the Machzis HaShekel. Let's skip to the highlighted part. The time of the hiluch of the mazavis, the planet's hours that they rule, it doesn't go by shayis manis, but shayis ashva. Rather, it goes by shayis shavis, by fixed hours. which is a big Kiddush, because we know that halacha generally goes by Shai Zmanis. Now, I just want to stress that this is not such a davar apashut, because today virtually everyone follows the Shai Zmanis, except for Kamar Nechsidim, who follow the Psak of the Zidin Shavar Rebbe to always follow fixed hours. By them, Kriya Shema is always 9 o'clock, Zman Tefillah is always 10 o'clock, etc. But most of the Klal Yisrael follows Shai Zmanis, and that seems to be universal minhag today. But if you go back in the sources, it's not pashut at all. So we see the first source we saw for Shai Zmanis B'chlal, who distinguishes between Shai Zmanis and Shai Shabbos. For some things we do Shai Zmanis, something Shai Shabbos, was Rav Machia. We saw in the Sefer Iber, and of course the Rambam is the one who brought it into halacha very strongly, and also the Teis Shantz, which we don't have today, but we saw the Maril refer to that Teis Shantz at the beginning of Brachas, which was subsequently lost apparently. But under the influence of the Rambam and Teisvis, Shai Zmanis became pretty much universal in halacha, even though some Rishonim disagreed, notably Tumas Hadeshen and other Rishonim, and some of the great Achreinim also disagreed vehemently. But nevertheless, universal practice today, almost universal, besides for Kamar Nechsidim, is to follow Shai Zmanis and halacha. But and that was already pretty much universal at the time of the Machzas HaShekel. Of course, you have the machlokes between the Magen Avraham and the Alter Rebbe and the Gra as how you count Shai Zmanis. So you see that Shai Zmanis were just becoming fixed around, you could say, around between the time of the Magen Avraham and the Alter Rebbe. That seemed to be when they became more universal. But by the time of the Machzas HaShekel is writing, Shai Zmanis are pretty much universal in terms of counting in halacha. But here he's pointing out that we're talking about Shai Shabbos, not Shai Zmanis. Im came Shabbos because if you're going to say that it's talking about, I'm sorry, not because, if so, therefore it comes out that what the Tikkun Shabbos said to make Kiddush in the hour before Shkia is only talking about in Yom Mashavim, in Nisan and Tishrei, where night and day are equal. It So he's saying that what the Tikkun Shabbos is saying to make Kiddush before the first hour of the night, to make Kiddush by day, it's only when Shai Zmanis and Shai Shabbos coincide, because he understands the Tikkun Shabbos to mean literally that it's talking. I mean, that's the Pashtus Lashon Tikkun Shabbos. You want to make Kiddush before nightfall, because nightfall is the time of the Mazel Maidim. But we know that Mazel Maidim is not nightfall. Mazel Maidim is 6 o'clock. So it must be he's only talking about the time when they coincide, when Shkia is at 6 o'clock, which is the days of Tishrei and the days of Nisan, Yom Mashavim. So that's the Machzas HaShekel. Now, at the same time Machzas HaShekel is writing this, I don't think the Alter Rebbe saw the Machzas HaShekel when he wrote the Shulchan. Certainly not when he wrote the Shulchan Aruch. The Alter Rebbe takes it a little differently. The Alter Rebbe certainly also says that it's Shai Shabbos. We saw the Alter Rebbe writes Shah Shvi Zachar Chatzeis. But the Alter Rebbe doesn't limit it to Yom Mashavim, to only those days when the Shai Zmanis and Shai Shabbos coincide. That 6 o'clock is Shkia, but rather year round. Although the Alter Rebbe says you should make Kiddush B'Eid Yom, but that's a separate thing. The Alter Rebbe says, well, let's go back to the Alter Rebbe. We'll see it inside for a second. Just to contrast it, I think it's useful to contrast the Lashon of the Alter Rebbe with how it compares to the sources we just saw. So first, the Alter Rebbe said in the previous Sif, even though he came home from shul and it's still daytime, you should make Kiddush immediately. So he's saying you don't wait for night, not like the sources that said to wait for night. And he says also to eat right away, although he also brings Rambam Mifano that if he's not hungry, you can wait. But it seems Alter Rebbe takes that as a shtickle b'diavad. In the Lashon of Alter Rebbe, he says that but when he starts off by saying the mitzvah and mufcher is yet to eat right away. So it seems if you're not hungry, okay, you're not going to force yourself to eat. But mitzvah mufcher, the ideal way to do it is to make Kiddush right away. And now we'll look at the next seif. Some are careful not to make Kiddush in the first hour of the night. Meaning, what's the first hour of the night is the 7th hour after Chatzos. Meaning Shoyes Shabbos, the 7th fixed hour after the night. I'm sorry, after Chatzos. Between 6 and 7 o'clock. So the Alter Rebbe doesn't limit it to Yom HaShavim, but year round. And he brings both. He's saying to make Kiddush in the first hour of the day, but he interprets that as between 6 and 7 after Chatzos. And then he concludes again, just to emphasize the point, that really you should be making Kiddush as soon as you come home from shul when it's still day. So, although there's room to read the Alter Rebbe as somebody suggested, I believe in last year, that you can read the Alter Rebbe as saying that really you should have made Kiddush before Shkia B'chlal, so you're not even going to get to between 6 and 7. But that's not tenable because, like the Alter Rebbe didn't limit it to if you limit it to Yom HaShavim like Machzah Shekel does, then that would make sense. But the Alter Rebbe doesn't hint anywhere that this is only limited to Yom HaShavim. So if we're going to say it's between 6 and 7 hours after Chatzos, so then it doesn't make sense to say that you're not going to have this problem if you listen to what I said before when you make Kiddush before Shkia, because one has nothing to do with the other. Before Shkia could be long after 6 o'clock. So you can make Kiddush long before Shkia and you still have the same issue. So that's why it seems that's why, but certainly the Rebbe clearly says that this is the Rebbe saying that meaning that even if you get home between 6 and 7, you should make Kiddush right away. So the Rebbe seems to be negating the minhag. But nevertheless, without the way the Rebbe presents the minhag, which we do follow this minhag, is gonna we'll see how the Rebbe builds on that later. But I just wanted to contrast it with the sources we just saw. So the Rebbe seems to be going again with the Eila Shabbos. Interestingly, in the footnotes here, they cited a Magen Avraham. That seems to be an error. They should have cited the Eila Shabbos. That's much closer to what the Rebbe is saying, because the Magen Avraham doesn't talk about waiting till after 7. Magen Avraham talks about making Kiddush before 6. The Eila Shabbos is the one who's saying to not to make Kiddush between 6 and 7. And unlike Machzah Shekel, the Alter Rebbe does not limit it to any time of year. So let's get back to where we were. We're almost done for the day, but let's just finish the sources we have here. Very briefly, there's 2 more sources we'll mention briefly. The Darshas the Chasam Sefer. He talks about the Gemara says, "Amar Rav Yesi Echelki Machnis Shabbos B'Tvarya U'Metzir Shabbos B'Tziperi," that my lot should be with those who take in Shabbos and Tvarya and end Shabbos and Tziperi. And Rashi explains Machnis Shabbos B'Tvarya because Tvarya is deep. It's low. It's low. It sits on the Kineres, so it's a low place, and it gets dark very early. And they think it's already sunset, and they're taking Shabbos early. And those that end Shabbos and Tziperi, because Tziperi is at the top of a mountain. When the sun, even after this, when the sun sets, since it's on top of a mountain, you still see a lot of light there. So they end Shabbos late. So the Chasam Sefer explains the Chasam Sefer explains what's the Yechalki, what's this great uftu that they're taking in Shabbos early, because they're making Kiddush always in the time of Mazel Tzedek, Shabbos, which rules in the last hour of Erev Shabbos. If he's going to wait for the first hour of Shabbos night, after Shkia, it's already the time of Mazel Maidim. And those that end Shabbos late, and Tziperi is 1 hour into the night of Meitzai Shabbos, which is the time of the Mimshala of Kechav, which symbolizes Hatzlacha in learning Torah. Yeah, so that's what's relevant to our point here, that Chassam Sofer explains this Gemara as referring that Rabbi Yossi is referring to that is what should be with those who make Kiddush in the Mazel Tzedek and make Havdalah in the Mazel Kechav. So, just interesting to note that Chassam Sofer seems to just assume without spelling it out. But Chassam Sofer clearly is assuming here that that it's talking about Shoyz Manis, like the Tosfos said. I just want to bring out how, as we go through the sources, and it seems so obvious that it's Shoyz Shabbos, but there's still this strand of thought where it seems that a lot of the sources assume that it's Shoyz Manis. So I just want to point that out that as that continues. And similarly, the Ad Ephraim, the great Beis Ephraim, from Ephraim Zalman Margolius, one of the great Peskim, also approximately a little later. Well, he's about the time of the Tzemach Tzedek, Mashakasav, or the Mittel Rebbe. Let's skip to the getting late. Let's skip to the highlighted part. So he's saying, before he starts saying about the whole cheshbon of the hours, that even though when it comes to first he brings down the Maril, that the Maril writes about Shoyz Manis and Shoyz Shabbos, and how the Maril explains it, that it's only by Nisan and Tishrei, which is the source of the Machzas HaShekel. If you recall, the Machzas HaShekel said that it only coincides in Nisan and Tishrei. The Maril says that a couple hundred years before that. So he brings down the Maril, and he says, when you start the Ein Zayin was that, and one has nothing to do with the other. The Tosfos chance that the questioner that was asking the Maril refers to, that where the Tosfos Shans talks about the Shoyz Manis, that is because Shachs. They're talking about the times of davening. The way name of the we're not going to say that the day doesn't start until it's 12 hours from the beginning of the night. That until the mazal Shatzam Chan Kal pass. Because what is that? That has nothing to do with davening. The mazolis and the hours. Davening has to do with daytime, right? And that starts when the day actually starts. And we count the entire day according to its hours. As the Maril wrote for the Inyan of Mincha and Kabbalah Shabbos, we certainly follow the actual day and night. Nevertheless, in terms of calendaring the beginning of day and night, it's a double pashut. It's obvious that the seder of the mazolis Katznash Chavam never changes. The Chochav choice every 24-hour period. The spheres keep turning. Every 24-hour period, they're turning at a constant rate, and it never changes. And always the Mazel Tzedek is at the end of the day of Friday, Shabbos, and Maidim will always be at the beginning of the night of Shabbos, which is, what does that mean? Here he's using day and night, as he just said, in an unchanging way. That never changes, and we count day from 6 hours after midnight, and we count night from 6 o'clock in the evening, 6 hours after Chatzeis Hayom. So that contrasts with the Chassam Sofer we just had a minute ago, approximately the same time. Chassam Sofer actually was a lot older. He was the Ephraim, they was older than the Chassam Sofer. Chassam Sofer was Ma'arich Yomim, so he lived longer, but they're writing approximately the same time. You see how they took the two different directions. I think that will be it for today. Next time, we're going to start discussing how we count Chatzeis. This is really the most interesting question. How do we actually count it in hours? What time do we observe? We'll get to it the next year. Any questions? I guess not. So let me turn off the recording.